Good. Senator Bacik, you have 8 minutes.
I'd like to welcome Minister Flanagan to the House and congratulate you on your appointment, Minister, and thank you for facilitating this recall. And on behalf of the Labour Group of Senators, I welcome today's special sitting of the Seanad to debate the situations in Gaza and Ukraine. Our group particularly welcomes the recall of the Seanad to debate the crisis in Gaza, and that's what I will focus on this afternoon. As Labour Group Leader, I was in contact with our Seanad Leader, Senator Maurice Cummins, over the weekend about this, and I fully support and welcome his decision to recall the Seanad, and I'm very glad we did this. I think this gives us an opportunity in this House to scrutinise the record of the Irish Government on Gaza and to review the recent appalling events there. I note that Oxfam and others have pointed out that in recalling at this critical juncture, the Seanad has already made a significant statement to the international community. So I hope in some small way this recall can assist in seeking some sort of resolution. And I particularly hope that the Israeli Embassy in Ireland will report back to Israel the revulsion expressed by all of us, I think, here today at the horrific loss of civilian life in the Gaza Strip. Like all Irish citizens, my Labour colleagues and I are horrified at the numbers of Palestinian civilians who have been killed in the bombardment by Israel of Gaza. We now know that over 1,300 Palestinians have been killed. Others have commented over 80% of them are civilians, including about 250 children. 2 weeks ago we saw 4 boys slaughtered on a beach. Since then we've seen 8 Palestinian children killed in a playground, as you yourself have said, Minister, a particularly heinous attack. We've also seen heinous attacks on civilian populations fleeing from bombardment in UN premises, UN schools. And again, these are appalling war crimes. As the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign has said, what we are seeing is a collective punishment of a captive population, horror and terror for the people of Gaza on an unimaginable level. About 240,000 people displaced with nowhere safe to go. UNICEF has said there is nowhere safe in Gaza, an area that's only 25 miles long and 7 miles wide with closed borders. Not only closed by Israel, but also by Egypt, which of course must accept some complicity in the slaughter of the Palestinian population in the enclave. And I'm particularly glad, Minister, to hear you spoke, I think you said this morning, with the Egyptian Foreign Minister on this, because I think that's an important point to make. And indeed, it's important to be even-handed in the debate. I stand with my Labour colleagues, and I think all of us, and the Irish Government, in condemning not only the bombardment by Israel of Gaza, but also the rocket attacks launched by Hamas, which directly target civilians of Israel, and are themselves also an offence in international law. I condemn any use of Palestinian civilians as human shields by Hamas, and I do respect the right of Israel to defend itself against rocket attacks. But any defence must be conducted in a proportionate and lawful manner, and I'm frankly appalled at the lack of respect for international law and the rules of war as shown by the Israeli government in the bombardment in recent weeks. And I've already spoken, as of others, on the horrific attacks on UN schools where Palestinian civilians, including large numbers of women and children, have been sheltering. And indeed, I wrote to you about this last week, Minister. As UN Chief Ban Ki-moon has said, the shelling by Israel of schools which were being used as shelters for displaced Palestinians is outrageous and unjustifiable, and it demands accountability and justice. Yet his words, as you say, Minister, have not appeared to have any effect upon the government of Israel, or indeed upon their supporters in the US, who continue to arm them. And perhaps the saddest thing of all, as we watch with increasing horror the mounting death toll, is the sense of helplessness and of déjà vu. I found earlier on my computer a letter I'd written to the newspaper in February 2009, nearly 5 years ago, explaining my support for the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign call for a boycott by consumers of Israeli goods and services. I was writing then in the context of a bombardment by Israel against Gaza, in which 1,400 Palestinians were killed, at least one third of whom were children. The comments made then, 5 years ago, could simply be repeated about the bombardment we are witnessing in current weeks. 5 years ago, we will all recall the words of John Ging of the UN speaking about the humanitarian tragedy that was unfolding, and today we hear the words of UN Relief and Works Agency staff and medics also speaking about humanitarian tragedy. UNRWA saying they're now at breaking point in terms of trying to cope with the crisis that has unfolded. What can we do about this? Well, I welcome the Irish Government's provision of aid to the Palestinians. I welcome Junior Minister Sean Sherlock's statement calling for an immediate ceasefire and also emphasising the need to lift the blockade on Gaza and its people and to ensure a credible international process to deliver a two-state solution based on pre-1967 borders. And I'm glad, Minister, that you have met with both the Israeli and the Palestinian ambassadors to Ireland to express again to them that this is the position of the Irish Government. I also appreciate that Ireland has a strong record within the EU on working for this, and I note that I'm very proud indeed that as Labour leader and previous Minister for Foreign Affairs, Eamon Gilmore stated full support from Ireland for recognition of Palestine at the UN in September 2011. So we have led on this within the EU. And I do appreciate that we have the strongest influence in international affairs when we work within the EU. And you have outlined that it was that approach which informed our abstention in the UN vote last week. Like many others, I was disappointed at how that looked, but I do appreciate that we need to preserve unity within the EU. And I do also appreciate that given the strong US support for Israel, that the EU is the only power bloc that can effectively take that on at international level. And indeed, we see an international quartet, the US, Russia, the EU and the UN. Ireland is strongest when working within the EU. But I do think that we need to push more strongly within the EU for some form of censure for Israel. I note that the last EU Foreign Ministers' Council, at which you attended, Minister, was the 22nd of July. I note that that took place before the attacks by Israel on 2 separate UN schools and the attacks we've spoken of on children in playground and beach, which clearly cannot be justified on any basis in any international law or rules of war. So I believe that at this point we should be seeking a meeting of the EU foreign ministers, a further meeting, and to look in particular to our Italian colleagues, who now I think have the presidency of the EU, to see can the EU now use the strong links we have with Israel, particularly in trade and in science, as leverage of some sort to seek to ensure more pressure put on them to achieve a solution and a resolution, and in particular to achieve an immediate ceasefire. We have a direct interest in seeking a resolution. You've said yourself, Minister, Ireland sends about €10 million per annum to support Palestinian development and infrastructure. The EU has for a long time contributed significant funds to develop Palestinian infrastructure, as is right and appropriate, but we've seen that infrastructure systematically destroyed by Israeli bombardment in 2008-09, for example, but again in the last few days and weeks. So I believe we need to be working more strongly within the EU to achieve this resolution. The Labour Party, thank you, Cahirlik, the Labour Party has long supported the aim of achieving a comprehensive multilateral peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, which respects international law, and we support the aim of delivering for the Palestinian people a secure, viable state of their own. The priority now is for an immediate ceasefire to prevent any further Palestinian or Israeli civilian death or injury. But we believe the international community must then work with Israel and Palestine to deliver a peace agreement which will bring about the lifting of the blockade on Gaza, which is the root cause of this devastating conflict, to end illegal Israeli settlements and to deliver a long-lasting peace to the region based on the two-state principle. I haven't spoken of Ukraine. You've spoken very eloquently on this, as indeed has Senator Cummins, but I do think there is a message here. With Ukraine, we see the EU taking strong action in terms of sanctions on Russia, which again is backing the separatists in Ukraine, just as the US backs Israel. And I think we need to see similar sort of strong action being taken by the EU in order to end the appalling conflict in Gaza. I suppose to end on a hopeful note, Cahirlik, to say that at such a bleak time for the Middle East, the Irish peace process, I think, can serve as some sort of useful indicator that even the most intractable conflicts can be resolved peacefully at the end, and that there is never a military solution to this sort of conflict. Thank you.